Hello, everyone. Dr. Yo here with an unedited video today to answer one of your most burning questions. And that question is, how long is it going to take me to recover from my chronic dizziness symptoms? And this goes along with a couple other questions that pop up on my channel, including, wait, does this still apply to me? This guy got better in 4 months. Why is that? And why do some people have this for 10, 20, or 30 years if it's just neural circuit dizziness? Why doesn't the brain adapt? So I'm going to answer all of these questions today by answering the first one. And again, that first question is, how long is it going to take me to recover? So, of course, the most annoying answer ever here, but the answer is it depends. However, it depends on some variables that you have under your control. So, I'm going to talk today about the variables that I see influencing how quickly people recover. And the most important one, in my opinion, is whether you are able to fully accept and understand that what you're dealing with is neural circuit dizziness. If you believe that your body is broken, that you have an incurable neurological condition, that you are not capable of getting better, then danger mode stays active in your brain indefinitely, and the symptoms can stick around indefinitely. And this is why so frequently you will hear about people who have symptoms for a really long time, because as many of you guys have experienced, and the reason you probably found me on YouTube is because most physicians who are operating from a biomedical model, when they can't find a physical problem explaining your symptoms, they basically write you off and say you have some kind of weird symptom based diagnosis and it's just anxiety. And I don't know if you're going to get better, at the very best, in many cases, with some exceptions. So, again, getting the correct information, getting the correct diagnosis of neural circuit dizziness, and accepting that that's what this truly is, despite the intensity and awfulness of your symptoms, is the number one factor in how quickly someone recovers. And that's why you see comments here on my channel from people who said, I just watched your videos and got better. Because for some people, that's all there is to it. They accept it, danger mode turns off, and they get better. So, that being said, I just want to be clear that it's okay if it's not perfect. Doubt is a normal part of this process. In fact, I call doubt a symptom. It's part of the symptoms. And it's okay if you're not at 100% all the time. There are going to be moments when you're like, I don't know about this Yonit lady. She's probably wrong. I have a horrible brain disease. Okay. There are going to be moments and days like that. But on the whole, understanding that this is what you're dealing with is a huge component of recovery. So, on that note, if you're still engaging in behaviors that are telling your brain and body that you're sick, that can also have an impact on your recovery. So, if you believe that it's neural circuit dizziness, but yet you're still chasing the next cure, you're still trying to find devices that might help you, you're still trying to find alternative medicine that might help you or special types of therapy. Again, this is completely normal and understandable. And I know you're suffering. And it is the most human thing ever. In fact, it's admirable that you are fighting against the symptoms so hard, because I know it sucks. It really does. But to an extent, especially when you're doing it with intensity, that is sending your brain a message of danger. It is sending your brain the message that the symptoms are dangerous and you're trying to get rid of them as soon as possible. And that can backfire by keeping danger mode active. Okay. So just be conscientious about that stuff. Be conscientious about how much you're chasing and how many therapies and how many alternative options you're looking at when you're trying to get better. Because ultimately, the more quickly you accept that you don't need special devices or special supplements or special clinics or what have you to get better, the more quickly you're going to get better. Okay. So That brings me to my second factor here. So, the second factor that I think plays a huge role in how quickly people recover is how much avoidance is still in your life. So, say you've accepted neural circuit dizziness as the answer, or you're close to fully accepting it, which is fantastic. If you're still avoiding certain activities because you're terrified that they're going to increase your symptoms, that also is an increase in danger mode in the brain that can be holding you back from full recovery. So, this includes two dimensions. There's the most obvious one, which is the outside stuff, the stuff that you're doing. In other words, avoidance of movement and activities. So, if there are still movements and activities that you're avoiding, that increases danger mode. And this is not to say that you should be super mean to yourself and push yourself really hard and force yourself to do things that make you feel awful all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But slowly exposing yourself in a kind and compassionate way to the things that are triggering to you is a necessary component of recovery. There has to be some exposure to the things that you are afraid of. And the more you do those things, the more quickly your brain will learn that those things are safe and okay. But there's a second dimension to this. So this isn't always the case, right? The movement and activity avoidance isn't always the issue. Sometimes it's an emotional avoidance. And there are kind of the obvious emotional avoidance situations, like avoiding conflicts, like having a hard time setting boundaries, like having a hard time saying no. These are things that are emotional avoidance. But even some of the characteristics and personality traits that I've talked about here on the channel, like being a perfectionist, being type A, being a high achiever, being a people pleaser, being a caretaker, many of these things, while, by the way, incredible traits in and of themselves, so I'm not saying any of them are bad, can be thought of, especially when they're extreme, as a way of avoiding uncomfortable emotions. So again, I'm not saying that everyone who's a perfectionist is only being perfectionistic because they're trying to avoid something terrible, right? But especially when those things are being done in a pretty intense way, it's often because there's something else we're trying to avoid feeling. So with someone who's really perfectionistic, it might be a way of avoiding feeling worthless or not enough. For someone who's a big people pleaser or caretaker, it might be a way of avoiding feeling abandoned or alone. So again, many of these things are beyond the scope of this video, but it's a good idea to take a look at your life and see if you have these patterns of emotional avoidance and see if you can relax those avoidant patterns a little bit and be willing to face some of the uncomfortable feelings so that you can live a life that is more authentic to who you are. And I know that is a very vague concept, but when you're living a life of avoidance, it's very hard to see when your needs are not being met. So I remember just a few minutes ago, I talked about setting boundaries and saying no. When you have these very strong patterns of avoidance, like a strong perfectionistic part, a strong people pleasing part, etc., those things tend to dominate and they're very rigid. And when they're dominating and rigid, you don't even really have access to your needs and what you would actually like to do in these situations. You're just being driven by these avoidant patterns. So recognizing what they are and helping them relax a little bit allows some of your needs to emerge so you can meet them. Okay. So avoidance. We want to avoid avoidance. All right. So that brings me to another one. So say you're doing great on all these dimensions. You've accepted this as neural circuit dizziness. You're back to full activities. You're being kind to yourself. You're emotionally aware. You're setting boundaries. You're meeting your own needs. How much dizziness are you doing every day? Okay. So at the beginning, especially when you start this, this journey and you realize this is neural circuit dizziness, these are the things I need to do to get better. It can be really easy to get swept up into this idea that I've got to do all these things. I've got to have all these practices and somatic tracking and parasympathetic breathing and VRT, and I need to journal. And it can very quickly become this dizziness-centric life. And again, that makes sense, especially when dizziness may have been the focus of your life because you felt miserable. So it may feel like a very natural transition, but ultimately, our goal here is to decrease the brain's attention on dizziness, not increase it or not keep it the same. So if you're wondering how long it might take you to recover and you've started to work through the other things that I already talked about, it's a good idea to limit how much time you're spending on dizziness specific practices every day. No matter how urgent it feels to you, less is more as long as you're being consistent. So it's good to be consistent, having some kind of practice every day. So that's another question I ask people when they're wondering how long it's going to take them to recover. Are you actually putting in work here? Are you actually doing the things that are going to help you get better? Are you practicing some kind of movement every day? Are you paying attention to your emotions? Are you giving yourself messages of safety? Are you avoiding social media? That's when avoidance is good. That's giving you messages of danger, right? Those are all really good things, right? Those are all really good things, but we want to not over focus on them. We want to limit how much time we're spending on them and try to resume normal activity as much as possible. And I know that looks very different for each of you depending on where you are in your recovery. So, the final thing I want to talk about here that really seems to affect how quickly people recover is the personal dimension. So, this includes whether someone has a history of trauma and also what that person's support system looks like in everyday life. So, when someone has a history of trauma, the brain is naturally more vigilant. It is much more trigger happy. It's much more likely to jump into fight and flight at the slightest triggering incident. Okay. So even with the slightest bit of stimulation, a brain that has gone through trauma, especially trauma that has not been fully processed and resolved, and what that looks like, we'll talk about in a moment. A brain like that is going to be much more likely to stay put for longer because naturally, this is a completely natural process. Your brain has learned that dangerous situations can happen and it wants to make sure that you never get into those situations again. And this leads into the second thing I said, which was that people who have great support systems tend to get better faster. People who have really supportive loved ones, good relationships with their family members, those people by far get better the fastest. Whereas people whose families are not supportive or whose partners are not supportive, or even worse, whose families or partners are part of the stress, are actually a big component of the person's stress in the first place, those people can have a hard time getting better faster. And as long as those people are still around and those conflicts go unresolved, again, danger mode can stay active. Not to say that you can't get better. As I've talked about previously, the only real component to recovery that matters is not being afraid of your symptoms. But if danger mode is still active, you can be not afraid of your symptoms and still have your symptoms constantly being reactivated by this other source of danger mode. Okay. So that brings me back to what I meant by processing trauma. So, again, this is kind of a tricky subject, but again, trauma has a way of shaping the brain long term to be much more sensitive to future issues, future sources of danger. And there are ways of managing that kind of, again, trigger happy brain, a brain that is more likely to switch into danger mode. And there are also ways of healing brains like that. Again, this is a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but there are some therapeutic methods that, again, probably work a little bit differently for everyone that function on a principle called memory reconsolidation. And memory reconsolidation means that you are able to change the way that memories are understood by the brain. So it's not a matter of overwriting memories or putting false memories in your brain. It's a matter of changing the emotional weight of old memories. And that can be done through certain therapeutic methods. So we can talk about that more in a future video if you're interested. But that was just a side note to say that if you have trauma that still makes this hypervigilant response arise when you think about it or when your brain is reminded of it, that can also just reactivate danger mode, even if you're no longer afraid of your symptoms. So, again, the question was, how long will it take me to get better? Most people most people get better within weeks to a few months from neural circuit dizziness, but this varies a lot. Some people get better the first day, and some people take longer. And again, these factors that we just talked about are the big players that I've seen, at least, in that recovery process. So I look forward to hearing you guys in the questions and comments section below. And if you liked this video, if you found it helpful, please like, share, and as always, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.